That's actually, oh yeah, that's a good point. So I'm recording. So originally there was homework, which was to see the run. I'm just going to give everybody a pass on that one. And basically because I need to I'm trying to keep the grades consistent, and I'm not going to require my next class to turn in the run because they didn't get that lecture clearly enough, right? So yeah, basically everybody gets a pass on today's homework. Way to go.
Are we still doing mentoring?
We can't do mentoring after, let's go ahead and do that after we kind of go through the lecture stuff today. And that way the rest of the class, I really am thinking this is going to be less than 30 minutes of talking about stuff. And then the rest of the class can be sort of open lab time and mentoring time and getting feedback. And I would like to walk around and sort of check and see what you all have right now in terms of progress too. I really hate the audio didn't work on that last video because I feel like it was a really good one. I feel like explaining the way to make that forward momentum work made sense. So I'll have to re-record that. Okay, so, oh, I'm not ready. What am I doing? Go ahead and open up Maya. And
what are we doing today? Are we doing the jump or the...
the jump and the punch. Let's go ahead and get the game going here. Okay, so I'm going to run around in Environment Pack 4 here.
Hey, that was a good one.
Isn't it a good one? I like it.
And I like how they set up lightings and stuff in there already.
Yeah, this looks good. So, what's your run though? That is not as good. Could definitely be better. Okay, so what I want to look at today is two things: the punch and the things that people sometimes get wrong on that or fight with on that, and the jump. And those are actually probably the two that have the most amount of technical problems, right? So hopefully you have your game loaded up. You have some version of this. Again, I would encourage you to probably go ahead and download a map so you can be running around in something interesting. What?
So are we reviewing work today?
Yes, after. After the lecture. That way we can just have a, because I didn't get to give the other class the lecture, it's not going to be a graded item. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I like to do for this is look at what makes the other animations successful, right? So for the jump, I like to just deconstruct that a little bit, right? So I want you to, if you have yours open, you can go look. But I'm going to look at the mannequin. So the mannequin has the same three animations that we are going to be using, right? We have the jump start, the jump loop, and the jump end. So if I just double click and watch these, we can see what's happening to these in this animation. As you probably already know, we can hit pause here, and we can go look that the very first image of this is this character squatting, right? The very first frame. So this means the first frame of your animation is not your idle. That is what it often is in a lot of animations, like your punch animation. The first frame of the animation will be your idle pose, right? In this case, the first frame of this animation is your character either anticipating or pushing off, right? So it's either going to be this or something like this, right? Now, the reason for this is because we don't have time to get that quick animation down. And so you'll see that in this, that's what the jump looks like. Right? You'll also notice it's very short in this. It's 12 frames long. And for them, they are going up to the up pose and then coming down to the like descending pose, right? This is the falling pose. It kind of depends on what you want yours to look like. I usually like to make my loop the up in the air pose, like the up pose. But I also go for a little bit of something more cartoony, right? So once you get to this pose, then we end this animation. The last frame of this animation is the start frame of our loop animation, right? So we get this. Now the thing I want you to notice is how far the character is off the ground, which is not very much, right? The reason for that is because your animation is not what makes the character go up in the air, right? It's the Unreal Engine is what makes your character go up in the air. That little capsule pops up in the air no matter which animation you play. So in this case, what you're really wanting to do is have the character idling somewhere just slightly off the ground, right? So probably a little higher than where they would be if they were just standing, right? And so that means inside of Maya, your jump animation is not going to make sense at all. Right? It's going to look like the character jumps but doesn't go anywhere and just kind of keeps floating where they were, right? And then finally, your land animation is really short. Like we got 4 frames here, right? So this is the way the character smacks the ground. I wanted to show you, recognize that this one is short because often when you land, your character will immediately start running again, right? Now, if you have some overlapping action on yours, that's cool, but just recognize if the player pushes the W key, it's going to blend out of that, right? You're not going to see that overlapping action as much. Which brings us to sort of the balancing of this, right? These 3 animations are all going to play, but they're not all going to play exactly like that. Right? There are transitions in between each of those. And so that's one of the things that you can do to balance this. Let me play mine really quick and see what happens. So she jumps up in the air. So notice on how she lands, right? She doesn't land like very, it looks like she hits the ground and then her feet hit the ground. Right? I was like her hips hit and then her feet reach out and hit, right? And I think that that's because of part of our transition. If I look at my character's animations on this, my jump up is her sort of pushing off the ground, right? My loop is obviously this silly thing that she's doing here, right? But then my down is a little slow, right? If you look at this, it takes her almost 5 frames before she's down there on the ground. And I think that that just needs to happen really quickly. In fact, I may even want to, I want to get her foot down on the ground in less than a frame, right? So I may even change my up in the air pose to be like something like this. That way she can quickly get to the ground and squash, right? I'll probably also trim off this little bit at the end here. I'm not for sure yet. So really my animation is just going to be like 4 frames to get that down pose, right? So the other thing we'll want to look at is under our animation blueprint. So for me, is that in here? Nope, it's under the Zelda file. Zelda Anim blueprint. So there's a lot going on in this for the jump, right? Oh, I'm in the wrong pose. So what we have is you're in your idle or your run, right, and you smack the space bar. And it says, what this transition does is it says it is going to transition into your jump animation. Right? So there's a couple of things that happen. In this transition, you'll see we have this duration. That is how long does it take to transition from your idle or your run to the beginning of your jump. And it's going to blend between those two animations as it does that. Right? If you're getting too much of a blend, you can reduce that number. So I could change that to 0.1 or even 0 if I want no transition at all. I just want it to snap. Right? And compile, save. And I'm going to get a slightly different transition now when she jumps. It actually feels a little bit better to me now. The other thing we'll notice in that animation blueprint is that once we get to the jump, or we get this transition here, there is another thing we can change. Oh no, I guess that's mainly it. Oh yeah, it's not into this. So the other thing is this second transition here, and actually this one down here is this one right here as well. There's this time remaining in the previous animation, right? So what that's saying is how much of jump up is left, right? How much of the jump up animation is left? Right now we have it set to 0.1, right? So when 0.1, which is basically 10% of that animation is left, it will start the transition into the next animation, right? You could change this, right? If you wanted to start it earlier, it's like you're overlapping. You know when you do a dissolve in Premiere, but from one clip to another? It's like it's doing that with your animation. It's blending from one animation to the other. And these numbers allow you to change how much of that blending happens. So, so this is one place where we can change the ratio of the previous animation that is left before it even starts this transition, right? And then on top of that, we can also change the duration of that transition, right? In all honesty, we don't really need that much of a duration on that transition because it ends in the same exact pose as jump, or it begins in the same exact pose as jump start ends, right? But all of these are things for you to balance it, right? So that's why, at least for your jump up, you're probably going to go into Maya, make a couple small changes, export, go into Unreal, make a couple small changes, play it, go back to Maya, make small changes, and it's going to incrementally get better. Strangely, your jump animation is not going to have a lot of animation in it, right? It's probably just going to be a couple of keyframes. What that's about is sort of this balance of how do you use this tool in order to make that jump feel correct to the player, okay? So this is the one that people fight with the most, and that's cool because that's actually the process, is fighting with it. Like you go in there and you figure that out. So if I have a little bit of time today, after sort of checking in with everybody, I'm probably just going to be up here working on these animations. What I did want to talk about, though, is also the punch animation. So if I look at my my third-person character, it doesn't actually have a punch animation for us to reference, right? So I wanted to instead just watch some animations to see what those should look like. Now this is these are a series of attacks that I did for Gearbox for the Battleborn game. These are all NPCs, but really their logic works very much like the player logic does. It's just the game is what's driving them, not the player, right? And so we got 3 different types of attacks. But the thing I want you to notice, at least on the second 2, so this first one, right? Oh, these are playing really quick. Okay, so this first attack, the character swings and takes a step forward, right? So he takes a step forward, and then he follows through with that next step, and he ends up in the exact same pose. He's just one step further forward, right? And that's very satisfying to watch because it feels like it has a lot of forward energy, but it's really hard to program, right? It's really hard to make that functional in your game. My advice is to not do that one, Right? Don't let your character take a step forward. If they do take a step forward, do it more like the second, like the spindly skeleton guy, that one there, where he takes a step forward, but then he steps back in to his idle pose. Your animation, your attack animation should start and stop with the first frame of your idle pose, right? So you whatever pose you settle on with your idle, that's where your character is going to start. After the attack is done, it's going to come back to that exact same pose. If it doesn't, when it transitions into the walk or the idle, it's going to have a little bit of a pop to it, right? This is something we call frame perfect, like that you are transitioning back to the very same keyframe that you're leading into in your next animation. So I think the thing to look at in these is the sort of the forward energy, or the energy in the direction that you're wanting the attack to go in, right? So we may come back to some of these here in a second, but something that is very similar to a punch or to a kick, either one, is actually a baseball pitch. So if we watch this, what we're really trying to see here is that there's energy being driven forward, right? If you're going to punch something, you are trying to send a lot of momentum, a lot of energy forward, so it makes contact and does damage, right? You're trying to knock something over, so that means the energy is in that direction, right? So I want you to look at how extreme this actually gets, and by the time he gets to the pitch part of this, which is where he's letting it go, right? So we're getting like right here, right? So when we talk about line of action, our character went from standing upright to leaning very much in this direction, right? One of the things that I see most in people's punch animation is that the character does, I'll turn to the side where you can kind of see it, the character does this, right? And that's very weak looking. Like, that's not going to hurt anybody. Right? Really get your character into that punch, right? Like, try leaning them forward into it, right? Try rotating at the pelvis. Stretch that arm as far as you can. If it's a kick, lean back, but stretch your pelvis as far forward as you can. And you're really wanting to show that impact, right? The other thing I want to show you in this video, which I thought was really cool, is how short of a time the actual impact takes, right? So this is at 1,000 frames a second. Like, his chest is already forward, but his arm flies forward really quick, right? So just an instant before, look at this pose here, right? Now, if we were seeing this in real time, if we were filming this at 30 frames a second, if we saw this frame, the very next frame we would see after that is probably this one, right? And that means his arm made a huge jump in spacing. We went from his arm back here to back here. It has this huge jump in spacing. Right? That's where the impact is going to come from. Right? If you're doing a punch, I'll go back and show you those punches we were just watching. The frame right before the impact is really got a huge amount of spacing. So let's go to effects and filters here where I can play this. Wait, I think there's actually an easier way to do this.
If you want to use frame by frame, the easiest thing you can do is press E on the like that.
E?
Yeah, E.
Ah, okay. So look here. He's thrown his chest forward. Now look at that arm. That's that frame right there. This frame, look where the hand is. The hand is right here, right? Watch the next frame. So that's a huge amount of spacing that covers. and that one frame, it goes from the hand being here to the hand being there, right? And that's where you get that snap of that impact of it, right? If your spacing is really small, it's going to feel like a gentle push, right? So really what you're doing is you're really trying to get this line of action that goes all the way through and hits right there. The other thing you can notice is the exaggeration on this. Look how long the arm is now, right? But as we finish up this animation, you'll see how long the arm actually is. Like they're long, but they're nowhere near that long, right? So I exaggerated that. You'll also see it here, right? The spacing from this frame, where the hand is right there, to the next frame, where it contacts the ground. Get a little bit of a bobble in it there. And then that was the impact, right? And then again, the same with this last animation here. So we start here, E. Look at that frame there. This is the frame right before the impact, and then it's over, okay? What that tells you is that the clarity of that hit, the clarity of that, and of that pose, right? There. So this pose right here has to be super clear, right? If you can't see that pose clearly, neither will the player. And it will feel like them hitting that button didn't do anything. If you get that pose really strong, right, then any reaction that happens from that feels very gratifying, right? So this pose is probably one of your most important poses to feel like it has a lot of energy, a lot of line of action, a lot of force driving forward. And that's one of the things that I would say to really emphasize when you're working on your punch animation. So. Okay, so questions? So again, a couple of notes if you're wanting to make these notes. Or really the biggest one I would say about the punch, make sure your first frame is the same pose, same exact pose as the first frame of your idle, right? And make sure the last frame of your punch or your attack is the same pose as the last frame of, or the first frame of your idle, right? So that needs to line up perfectly. Export often and test it in the game often, and then just iterate until Tuesday, right? We just have a week worth of making small changes, and it's going to get incrementally better. Just out of curiosity, is anybody liking this process a lot, like the game parts of it? Anybody not liking it? All right, that's cool. It's absolutely fine for it not to be your thing, right? What I would say is after you get past sort of the technical parts of this, the job is the same, right? I go in and you make animations, you set keyframes. What is missing in this, and what a lot of people sometimes don't like, where's Parker? Parker? Oh, there he is. He's coming back. Because I know Parker was one who really didn't like it. We were just talking about you, Parker. Parker was somebody who really was not a big fan of the game animation process, right? Why was that? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. I think it was like the back and forth thing kind of got on your a little bit. But.
You mentioned you also like long pieces instead of short ones.
So I think that is totally something that.
Oh yes, that too. Because I like longer, and they were like.
The very short snippets
yeah,
or something, right? I think that there's some pros and cons both ways. Like you don't get a lot of time to express what you want to express, and you're usually not expressing some deep-seated desire, right? Like you're not with this punch, I would like to express my feelings about what is going on overseas in this. It's nothing like that, right? It's like punch, kick, run, angry. You know, it's very simple emotions, right? And it's usually much more centered around a physical action, right? And so this is actually where the divide will start to happen, where you start to decide what it is you want to do. And the biggest division, I think, in character animation is, do you like body mechanics more or do you like acting more? And if it really is boiling down to acting, you like the storytelling part of that, you know, this part of animation is not going to be as appealing to you. Recognize that it's not the only part of animation in game animation. There are plenty of, I spent 5 years in Baltimore at Firaxis, and most of the time I was doing animations of people acting, right? So cinematics animators are basically film animators, it's just rendering in a game engine, right? And those are often completely different positions. So, you know, try it out. If you don't like it, that's fine. You're just going to start gravitating towards stuff. Even acting animation, though, does need a strong understanding of body mechanics, and this is a way where we can study that in 4 quick animations. And if all 4 of those end up not making it into your demo reel, that's okay. There's still 3 others we do in this class that maybe will. Other questions on any of this? All right. So what I'm going to do now, I know that wasn't very much information, and it's because there really isn't a lot I mean, other than if you want to watch me animate when I start animating those shots, there's not a lot that I can do in terms of like a lecture of this. You kind of have to start putting it in there. Not a big anticipation, but a big spacing right before that impact pose. Make the impact pose really strong. Start and stop with your idle pose. On the jump animations, it's all about how you transition into these very different states of the character. And some of that is going to be something you can control with the animation, and some of that is going to be something you control with Unreal. Right? And really, that's what a lot of this is about, is just fighting with it, making small changes, going in, see if that fixes it. What I would encourage you to do, though, is get other people to play it, because they're going to experience it differently than you because you're so used to it. In the same way that it's a good idea to flip your image, right, when you're watching a video of your animation, having somebody else play it, they will be like, why does that land so soft? Or why is the character's leg doing that? You may not even notice that. You may be always staring at something else. So, so this is probably a good segue into breaking up into the groups, so we can kind of get some reviews of stuff. What I would say is I'm not going to be, because I sort of messed up, this is a freebie in terms of the homework grade. But I would like you to spend a little bit of time with your groups just chatting with them and seeing how to make stuff better. And then after that, if you have any questions for me, I'll be more than happy to sit down and work with you. I'd also really be interested if anybody has some stuff that they're needing feedback on and they want me to play their game, I'd love to check it out and give you some feedback on that. Yeah. My wife would probably be very, she's been really worried about the coronavirus thing, and so she's going to be like, really? You volunteered to sit down at the computers and like touch all over the keyboard? But we got Lysol wipes here. And I know some people are more paranoid about it than others, but I do think there's some illness coming, and be cautious about it. Wash your hands, wipe stuff off. So we got plenty of Lysol wipes up here if you want to wipe down the computers. And we'll see what the university's actual response to that is if it gets close. So, otherwise, class is yours. If you want to go ahead and break up into your groups, it'll at least give some feedback, and I'll wander around and help out however I can.
I'll talk to you later about some stuff.